Hello, I'm XGTT and today I will be talking about one of the co-creators of the Ninja Turtles, Peter Laird, on the occasion of his round 70th birthday. So happy birthday to him. Of course, it will be a video largely about Ninja Turtles, but the main topic will be Laird and his point of view. I will post some interesting stuff about TMNT in May when there will be the 14th anniversary of the brand. Peter Laird was born on January 27, 1954, in North Adams, Massachusetts, United States, of course. He has two brothers, Bruce and Don, and one sister, Chris. He talks about his father positively. He's been a big influence on him. In Peter's words, he's probably the most decent, honest, and patient person I've ever known, and that has been an inspiration over the years. He also points out that his father has not had a specific impact on him. He wasn't the one who dragged him into topics like the comics, the TMNT, dinosaurs, or motorcycles, but he was important for Peter in the sense that in all these things he has been pretty supportive, if not always fully understanding his son's interest in them. Peter himself worked as a paperboy delivering newspapers, and one of the things he spent the money he earned on were things from his beloved Star Trek, including a flight deck certificate. Peter graduated from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst with a degree in art, receiving his BFA in 1976. It was during his studies that he noticed the style of Jack Kirby, a name that will be repeated here a few times. Peter chose the field of study a bit by accident. During the student orientation meeting, he wanted to learn something about the science majors he was planning to go to, but he got to the wrong meeting, and thanks to this accident, he decided to study art. Equally by accident, his career with running the little used bookshop began. He and a few friends rented a space to start a graphic design business, but the others withdrew from that idea, and Peter decided that he would use this space to sell comics that he had collected over the years. Peter married the chosen one of his life in June 1983, a teacher and later also a writer, Janine Atkins. She mentioned that he's involved in the early 1980s with an organization of like-minded individuals who were protesting the proliferation of nuclear weapons led to his association with her, but he doesn't go into any details. His involvement was in the form of contributing ideas and illustrations. Anyway, in 1978, he also started selling illustration for the Hampshire Life newspaper. For some time, he and his friend published a zine called Scat. And it's a Scat that started the chain of circumstances that led to the creation of the Ninja Turtles. I want to focus on Laird, but it's impossible to ignore the contribution that Kevin Eastman made to his life. And one day, he was taking a bus to work at a pizzeria and found a copy of Scat left by someone. He went to their headquarters, he got Peter's address, wrote to him, Peter wrote him back and invited him to his place. Kevin took up the invitation, come to Laird house, saw the original Jack Kirby drawing, and that's where it started. Kevin and Peter are an interesting case of people with very similar tastes at the same time, very different ones. Jack Kirby brought them together. They both love him. They started working together, messing around, dreaming about comic book success, and it so went on. The well-known story continued. Kevin drew the fish turtle in a bandana and with a weapon. Peter made his own version. Kevin painted 4 turtles and he called it Ninja Turtle. Peter added Teenage Mutant to it, and in such a trivial way, one of the most famous franchises on the world was created. As mentioned, they were both very different. I think that one of the 1,000 details that determined the success of TMNT was the way of working they chose. Each has their own drawing style, but they made every page together. They exchanged work, whether it was penciling, inking, or other stages, thus creating a mix of their styles. A truly collaborative work. Returning to their characters, Richard Rosenbaum, author of the book Rise Some Shell, describes Eastman as more outgoing, interested in the violent side, the more emotional side of things, where Laird, in his opinions, is a lot more introverted, calmer, more intellectual in terms of storytelling, in terms of art style. At the level of the way how they told the stories, it was very similar. Peter is a nerd. I will come back to this later. He likes to tell well. story is focused on exploring science fiction themes. Kevin, on the other hand, is focused on action, fighting, etc. This is especially visible in the case of Volume 4 from Mirage, written by Laird, which I remember as a much slower, focused on exploring new threats rather than fast and dynamic ninja action. The cooperation continued, and in the meantime, the Turtles achieved great success, which resulted in many things. This included the fact that, due to how much work was involved in managing their success, something broke between them and the cooperation was no longer the same as before. The system of working together described above lasted until issue 11 on the main series. From issue 12, they operated in the one Peter, one Kevin mode. This doesn't mean they never returned to creating together. In the classic style, they worked on the stories Return to New York and City at War, but as Peter admits, it was no longer the same. Of course, they continued to cooperate more or less for some time, but over time they became more and more distant until they actually had no contact with each other. In 2000, Peter bought the right to the franchise from Kevin, and finally he sold all the rights to the Viacom in 2009. The story has gone full circle because Kevin found employment creating TMNT comics for IDW. He had once created this brand himself, now he is just a simple employee. But more about this in another video focused on Kevin. Peter described his relationship with TMNT by quoting Jack Kirby comic books, a phrase that also appeared a few times in TMNT. Life at the best is bittersweet. He understands that TMNT brought him success and opportunities he never really considered he might have. On the other hand, it also made him less an artist that he thought he would be. He had not evolved his skill set in the way he thought and hoped he would. But overall, he is happy with how it turned out, and in his opinion, the good generally outweighed the bad. He has an equally pragmatic attitude towards various TMNT-related productions. For example, he is not a fan of the first animated series. He thinks that it is an incorrect proportion. It quickly became too silly in his opinion. The original comics were based on being an adventure story with some humor, while the first series was a humor story with some adventure. Peter preferred the original approach, and it turned out to be pretty successful when he worked closely with 4Kids on the 2003 TMNT show. However, he realized that if the series has been created in 1987 in the same form as the one from 2003, it may not have turned out to be the success it was. He understood that TMNT was successful the way it was created as an independent comic, but it became a truly mega success and phenomenon thanks to softening becoming more kid-friendly. From Peter's various statements emerges a strongly negative approach to only one aspect of TMNT. Series The Next Mutation and the idea of the fight turtle presented there. He thinks that the design of Venus is ludicrous, flat out idiotic. He also adds that he had the misfortune to be introduced into what was a pretty bad show with some awful ranting. And he mentioned how she handily defeated the Shredder, the turtle's biggest villain, in just a few minutes with her special magic powers. A lot of his reservation, however, concerns the issue of adding a 5 turtle in the form of, actually, there were always 5 of them. He mentioned that for a long time, the various people have suggested adding a new character like Picasso the 5 turtle or Van Gogh the 5 turtle. I wonder how he would approach the characters of Jenica from the IDW comics. I myself consider the concept of Venus to be stupid, precisely because of the way she was introduced, but I consider Jenica an interesting character who, however, does not take away the uniqueness of the main 4, as Peter also mentioned, but adds her unique contribution to the team. I think that Jenica could be accepted by him. On the other hand, his own statement about IDW comics were not enthusiastic. For example, he was not very keen on the idea that the Turtles and Splinter are reincarnation of people who once lived. Something about what kind of a person Peter is can also be said by his founding of the Xerix Foundation, which was established, quoting his words from the book Comic Book Rebels, to give back something extra to the comic world. They were helped financially in the crucial time by Kevin's uncle, Quentin, so Laird wanted to help other comic book creators. On his 2 blogs, Private and About TMNT, Peter wrote about a lot of various topics, including Ask Peter Laird notes, where fans asked him various things. I have collected the most interesting question and answer in my opinion. He was asked twice about comic book crossovers and who he would like to see a TMNT crossover with. The fifth time he answered about characters such as Jack Kirby and Regan the Demon, The Thing, Daredevil, Batman, Spider-Man and Wolverine. The second time he mentioned Batman, The Thing and Magnus, Robot Fighter. In both cases, The Thing and Batman were mentioned, and the Turtles had crossover with the second one, more than once. We got two different comic book versions, one of which has 3 volumes, and an animated film. And speaking about crossovers, published in 1987 24th issue of Who is Who, the definitive directory of the DC Universe, containing description of characters from Team Trench to Universo, one of the described characters is the Turtle Man, the Flash opponents, and his drawing there is made by Peter Laird. So not only did he co-create one of the largest Turtle franchises in the world, but he also has a small contribution to the most important Turtle in the DC universe. When asked in 2008 about his favorite TMNT villains, he of course mentioned Shredder, but also Triceratons, noting that not all of them are bad. He also mentions Hun from the 2003 series and characters such as Rat King, Savanti Romero, and Shredder's Elite Guard. He was also asked what is the favorite TMNT item he have. He couldn't choose just one, he pointed out to a whole range of TMNT related things that were close to his heart. The very first TMNT figures from Playmates, the miniature lead TMNT figures from Dark Horse Miniatures, the hardcover collected edition of the Mirage TMNT comics, the initial 11 issues plus the 4 micro-series, the Star Trek TMNT figures from Playmates, the Universal Monsters TMNT figures from Playmates, the NECA TMNT figures, the 2003 TMNT animated series, including Fast Forward and Pac du Sever, the first TMNT live-action movie, the TMNT CGI movie, and of course the vacuum-metallized Fugidoid. A question was asked about his last favorite of the 4 TMNT movies released at the time of the question. Peter chose the second one, Secret of the Ooze, as the answer. When asked about favorite original character created for either Turtle series, he replied that he did not have any favorite characters introduced in the first series, and from the 2003 series he said that he liked Bishop very much, and also mentioned Nano and the Ancient One. When asked about his favorite films from the 1980s, he mentioned the first Terminator and noted that he also liked many other films, mentioned The Princess Bride as an example. Staying on the topic of films, he was also asked about his opinion on The Lord of the Rings. He has seen them many times and he believed that they were a wonderful distillation of the essence of these books into films. It's no secret that Peter's favorite Ninja Turtle, with whom he even identifies, is Donatello, but he was also asked who was the second in order of liking. He didn't point out any of them, saying that he liked the others basically equally. He only pointed out the fact that Raphael can be tiring sometimes. Which is interesting because while Peter is associated with Don, Raph is kind of alter ego of Kevin Eastman. When asked about his favorite incarnation of the Shredder, beside the original Mirage Shredder, Peter points out the Shredder from the 4Kids series, and as the last favorite, the pathetic creature from The Next Mutation, using his words. In 2013, he was asked who should be the director of the next TMNT film, if he could choose. He pointed to Joss Whedon, a creator then associated with such work as Buffy, Vampire Slayer, Angel, Firefly, Serenity, or Avengers from the MCU. When asked about Donatello's favorite science fiction movie, he pointed out to the original The Day the Earth Stood Still. When asked about his last favorite Turtle series from Playmates, he points to the Clown Turtles and said these were almost unbearably silly. In other question, Laird also said that he was never attached to the teenage aspect of the name, just as it never mattered to him whether the turtles were battle also in the biological sense or for unrelated turtles. Because what mattered after all is the fact that they were all broadening the sense of a bond, and Splinter, despite being a rat, is their father. At the most disappointing thing to happen in the tenure of TMNT, he selected the end of his partnership and decline of friendship with Kevin Eastman. When asked about most wonderful memories in his comics career, he described how, as part of the work of Donatello one-issue microseries, in which Jack Kirby was to appear, they contacted him by mail, explaining what they wanted to do. They asked for permission to use his image and offered to share the profits. About a week later, the phone rang at Peter's house, and it turned out that it was Jack Kirby himself, whom he idolized, and calling to say that's no problem, they could use him as a comic book character. Another positive memory also concerns Jack Kirby and how, together with a group of people from Mirage, he was invited to a party celebrating the artist's 70th birthday. And during this meeting, when the Peter and other people on whom Jack had a huge influence told him about it, Kirby said, "I consider you all my sons," which made a huge impression on him then and still does today. I'm ending the video in this positive note. Thank you for watching, and I hope to meet you again in the next video. Bye!